Say our Father, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, man, make us worthy to pray thankfully, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and forevermore. All right, so last week we did chapter 18. And just get, there was a couple chapters in between what we did last week and where we're going now. So it's just good to make sure we're all on the same page. So chapter 18 was when Abraham was standing outside the tent and the three visitors came, and one of them was God with two angels, and Abraham invited them in, shared a meal with them, and they reaffirmed the promise where God said, this time next year, you are going to have a son, right? The son of promise from you and Sarah. And Sarah hears it, laughs inside the tent. And then we kind of move from that scene where God is moving out to Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was such an interesting conversation between God and Abraham, because, when we look at the verses surrounding that, God kind of has this internal monologue, which we have captured in the scriptures of, should I tell Abraham what I'm about to do? Right? And it was great because he decided to tell Abraham what he was going to do. And the reason why is because he wanted to raise Abraham to be a leader. He's like, he's going to be a leader, not just for the people now, but for people in generations to come. So I have to raise him up to be a leader, and be a leader of righteousness and justice, which are two things that are very hard to bring together and have them complement one another. The only person to do it perfectly was Christ, but it is a combination of values that need to come together in great leaders. And so Abraham and God, Abraham kind of bargains on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, trying to say, like, okay, if there's 50 righteous, will you still destroy the city? And he works all the way down to 10. And then at 10, he's like, okay, like I've done like what I feel is appropriate. And then the conversation ends. But lo and behold, it's only Lot and his family who were righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And chapter 19, which we didn't read and we're not really going to cover other than this, was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and how Lot escaped with his two daughters and his wife. But the instructions that they were told upon leaving Sodom and Gomorrah is run and don't look back. But Lot's wife wanted to look back, and she did, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Right? And then so that brings us to chapter 20. And chapter 20 is kind of like a little bit of a weird chapter, if you will, because it captures a very similar story to when Abraham goes down to Egypt and tells Pharaoh that, well, she's my sister, right? And we see that early on, and God protects Sarah, and God blesses Abraham through it. But Pharaoh was clearly upset when he realized that, no, that's not your sister, that's your wife, right? And we have the same scene happen again, because in the promised land, Abraham moves down south a little bit. We're not told why, just says he moves. And he comes to this place called Gerar. And there's a king there, Abimelech, who takes in Sarah because she, again, according to the instruction of Abraham, says that, well, that's my brother, and I'm his sister. But while Sarah is taken in, God again protects her, and warns Abimelech in a dream, saying, if you touch her, you will die. And when you look a little bit deeper as to why he kind of phrased it like that, it's because adultery was punishable by death. And so he didn't realize that this was Abraham's wife. And so he kind of pleads with God, and he says, okay, but I didn't know. I didn't have bad intentions. He said it was her sister, right? And so God says, I get it. Don't touch her, right? And return her back. And then And kind of two things happen. Like God restores Abraham, but one of the punishments that came upon Abimelech and his house because he had taken Sarah was none of them were able to conceive. Like his wife, his maidens, none of them were able to conceive. And so it was a bit strange. And then when Sarah was restored, Abraham prays on behalf of Abimelech, and God kind of lifts up this punishment from them, and his wife and different women begin to conceive again, right? So that's 20. And so it's similar to what happened in Egypt. And what we see is like, okay, Abraham is still learning, right? He's still growing. Kind of, we look at certain situations in life, we're like, I'm never going to do that again. And then like it happens 2 months later, like I did it, right? So something similar happened with Abraham. He did it again, but yet God is faithful despite our weaknesses, despite like kind of some of the cyclical things that we fall into or the insecurities that we have. God is still faithful to us, right? So that's where we are. Now we're going to get to chapter 21, which is the birth of Isaac, right? But before we get into it, let's toss out some questions. First question is it possible that in the most meaningful moments of life, you would only experience kind of one emotion? Like you'd look at something and be like, gosh, I'm so happy. Is it like actually possible that in special moments, like key moments, that you would really just experience one emotion and nothing else? No. Should have thought of a better question. Everybody got it. You're right. We can. Okay. So then let's look at certain scenarios or situations in life where like they're big, but they're kind of a confluence of emotions.
Pregnancy.
Okay. What emotions come together in pregnancy?
Can I just say a couple and then we'll stop?
You can just say a couple,
There's
right?
too many. I mean, fear.
Okay.
Awe. Like the awe of God.
Yeah.
Like how he it just and reverence, like the fact that like there's so much that's outside of your control. And joy, yeah, just so many things that come together. I mean, I can keep going.
That's okay. That's good. What are other scenario situations where we have like emotions that come together, and sometimes emotions that seem almost like contradictory? Like, how can you have this emotion along with this emotion and call it like a happy moment in life?
Financial fear.
Okay, financial fear. What else?
Sorry, we said counter to each other, so that's why I added
Counter.
agree.
I'd say like graduating or starting a new job. Like you're really excited and proud, but you're also scared and
Okay.
nervous.
All right.
Going to a new school, like, beginning something new.
Okay, beginning something new, like going to new school, right?
Death,
What'd you say?
death,
Death. Okay. So death is. I think death is an interesting one. I'm gonna get to that one. I think death is an interesting one because sometimes like you look at certain situations, especially when I think an individual has suffered for so long, and you look and okay, the time has come to pass, and you're like, you feel bad, but you feel a sense of relief, and you're like, how can I feel relief at the passing of somebody? But yet the two work together, right? Because there's a like a bit of humanity where you're like, okay, but we weren't meant to suffer. So I think death is a really interesting one. And then you mentioned marriage. And I'll save you, I'll speak from my point of view. All right. All right. And that's not for my marriage, okay, for the record. But like, sometimes because in some situations I get insights into what's happening leading up to marriage, right? I get involved in the problems and the challenges and mother-in-law said this and dad said this and like brother's doing this and like all these different things. And then you get there and you get to the wedding day and you hear like what people say and you're like, okay, that would have been nice for you to say that like earlier. I think we would have avoided a lot of problems. But like you see that there's loaded emotions in like the speeches that like you're saying like something really nice, but behind it, you know that like there's a lot of tension around that as well. And I think these are just natural events in life where feel meaningful, partly because there's such a confluence of emotions kind of within that. So those are a couple that I had in mind. Any others that you guys want to share?
For me, it
Is
was
the
buying
what
the house.
Buying a house?
Buying the house was the most stressful thing, but I was also crying because I was like, I'm proud of myself for finally getting to this place. But it was,
That is cool. That is cool. It is stressful.
yeah,
I think to add to that, I think buying a car
yeah.
is one of the most stressful things, especially when they take you to the back, right? Where they actually show you all the numbers and you're like, this is what we agreed upon. This is actually how much you're gonna pay. And this is how much you're actually gonna pay like over the life of the loan. And you're like, so I think buying a car is extremely stressful as well, but also kind of fun. Like when you're done, you're like, oh, okay. So a lot of things have these mixed emotions, right? That come together. And when we learn to embrace like awfully loud. When I think everybody's fine. I think that was on the outside. But when we learn to embrace all of the emotions that come together, we kind of appreciate the fullness of what's happened, right? But when we try and block, certain elements of it, it becomes hard to really appreciate kind of everything that's going into the moment. And I think we're going to have one of these moments when we look into today as we see the birth of Isaac. Okay, the birth of Isaac. So let's jump to Genesis chapter 21, and we're going to read 1 through 7.
And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, Sarah bore to him Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age.
All right, thank you. Go to verse 1, where it says, and the Lord visited Sarah, and as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. If you were to like dig into this word visit in this context, how would you understand? The Lord visited Sarah.
Delivered. It came to work.
Okay, so visited like here at the last stretch.
Like, yeah. Well, no, not necessarily. Like he
Such
visited.
a final answer.
He visited as in he came through, like he delivered on what he said he was.
Okay. So
Visited, it's,
go ahead.
no, I don't know.
There's no wrong or right. We're having fun. Okay.
Like he visited her in spirit by, I guess it's.
Okay. Okay. How else would you interpret? You're right. How else would you interpret this word visited?
I interpret it as he blessed Sarah and allowed her to.
Mhm.
which is part of the promise.
Okay. So
Would it,
blessed her in the ability to conceive at her old age.
I don't know if this is fair to make a comparison to, but like maybe visited with the Holy Spirit, visit Mary
Okay,
in conception for Jesus.
okay. Okay. Right on, Elijah.
Does it mean that he visited her, so that must mean that she had favor?
Okay, that she had favor. Like, you're right, and favor is this idea of God pouring his grace, right? And when we think of this idea of God pouring his grace on this situation of Sarah wanting to conceive and bring forth a child, and this being like a lifelong challenge, and also a a source of tremendous sorrow. And finally, the Lord visits, pours his grace. It is not just when they visited a year ago and said, okay, from this time forward, it is in the conception, it is in the pregnancy, it is in the delivery, it is God's presence, like throughout. When you see God working and doing a fashioning a miracle that isn't isolated to one thing, but isolated to a season, if you will. This idea of visit is God's presence truly like being felt. And that's not to say God isn't felt, right? He is always present, but there are times where we are able to see his action. And when we look at the life of Abraham and Sarah, and especially in this latter part where Sarah is finally delivering, we see the Lord is visiting, the Lord is present, and the Lord is active. So this idea of visit is not isolated to one thing, one comment, or one situation, but God's active presence in our life. And it's nice because when you also reflect back on your own seasons of life where you're like, ah, get there? How did I make it through? The same can be said when you have this hindsight and you're like, wow, the Lord was with me. The Lord had visited me. He was present. I felt him, largely because I realized how hopeless I was and I was actively looking, right? And so I to the best of my ability, like appreciated his visit in a very intimate. So it's such a beautiful way of looking at how what God had done and phrasing it in a way he has visited me. Because when God is present, he is very active as well. All right, let's look at verses 6 and 7. Verses 6 and 7, I'll read it quickly, and it says, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. Now, if you could capture Sarah, just from these verses, it's beautiful, actually. Right? What makes it so beautiful?
She finally same where she came from prior, where
Yeah.
there was maybe some like doubt and desire to control the situation. She's like finally in a place where she understands and sees the miracle that was intended.
Okay.
And so it's like a full circle moment for her. And like it's like you're like kind of the confluence of emotions.
Uh-huh.
She's laughing, but it's also kind of like after all of this time, and it's like coming to that realization. So it's, I don't know, for me, it's like seeing her like growth up to this point of like her finally coming to the acceptance of like joy of being in Lord's faith.
Mhm. What makes like this so special? I think it's all the pain and the disappointment and the hurt that led up to this, right? This is why her laugh among anybody else's laugh, it like carries a special ring to it. So much that Isaac, like the derivation of Isaac means to make someone laugh, right? To gladden somebody. And what makes Sarah's laugh so beautiful is the road to get there. And as one of the reasons why I was sharing with you at the beginning, or I say the question, like, okay, the most memorable experiences in life are filled with emotions that sometimes seem contradictory, but together can be fashioned in such a beautiful way that brings so much meaning to what it is we finally experience it again. Right. And so Sarah was so frustrated. Sarah was so hurt, not being able to conceive. Tried to solve it through, giving Abraham Hagar and then eventually having Ishmael, but it still couldn't solve it. And see all this heartache that finally leads to the laughter. And it's important to look at Sarah's like heartache, because we go through these seasons of heartache that seem to last forever. That is like there's no end to this. And what's the point of this? And like, where are you going with this, God? And in some way, he's fashioning a lot of these situations so that we would one day laugh. Not every situation is going to be a laughing situation. But there are some heartaches where the Lord is allowing it, knowing that one day, like, we will laugh at Sarah's laugh. So it's good to appreciate that what the heartache we experience now, in some situations, is working towards something much greater. All right. Now, we have the heart, Sarah's laughing. Now let's read 8 through 13.
And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of this son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring.
Okay, thank you. What's happening here?
Time for Hagar to fulfill her promise.
What do you mean? Like describe the scene. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. What's happening?
After Isaac is born, Sarah acknowledges that his role is going to be special and unique from Ishmael, and God previously promised Hagar that even though Ishmael wasn't intended the same promise, he would also be blessed in a different way.
Right.
And so, I don't know if Sarah knows that she is kind of initiating that process when she's sending out Hagar and Ishmael, but that is kind of like going to fulfill that promise that God made to Hagar about Ishmael still being able to be in a good position in the future and have like be the leader of like other nations and things like that. So I feel empathy in the way that it's happening, because I feel like Sarah and Hagar, they don't necessarily fight, but like, they don't like each other, but it's something that has to be done, so.
Oh yeah, there's total drama between those two.
Yeah.
Total drama. What's really setting this off? Ishmael. Was it Hagar or Ishmael?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah saw the son of Hagar. So what's scoffing? It's not a word we often use. What's scoffing? So it's kind of like an evil snickering, if you
Yeah.
would, right? Where you're kind of like looking at somebody and like thinking poorly or negatively of them, like jeering at them. So that's scoffing, okay? So Sarah sees Ishmael do it to Isaac during the celebration, okay? So let's kind of recount like where we are with everybody's age. So average age a child is weaned back then, maybe 3, okay? Ishmael who remembers about how old was Abraham when Ishmael was born? In the 80s, mid-80s, so like 85. Okay, so 10 years after they left. So Abraham left at 75, Ishmael at 85, and Isaac at 100. Okay, so right now Ishmael is about approaching 20 years of age. Okay, and Abraham is about 103, assuming 3 years to wean Isaac. What's at stake? What do we have here? This is like the perfect recipe for like days of our lives. Okay. Because we have a child who is the heir. We have the stepson who is older and has motive because Abraham has a lot of inheritance. He has been blessed by God. So we have like a soap opera in the making. And Sarah picks up on it. Okay, and she sees what's happening between Ishmael and Isaac and the jealousy and the realization that she could watch over Isaac, but Ishmael's more or less like he's a man. So could something happen to Isaac? It's very possible, right? Or this is the fear that Sarah has. And so she's like, it's time to send them away. Right? Her motherly instincts kind of kick in, and it's time to send them away. And so she tells Abraham, it is time to send them off. And Abraham clearly upset and very disheartened about this, right? But what we have here is God kind of stepping in. And we notice here that the first time Sarah had an idea and she pitched it to Abraham, which was to sleep with Hagar in order to get Ishmael, what did God say? Nothing. Not a good idea. With this one, God speaks, right? He steps in. He's like, look, listen to your wife, right? This was good advice from God. Listen to your wife. Send them off. Okay, you shouldn't have listened to her back then, right? But you did. And now we're here, but now you need to send them off. Okay? But don't worry, because I will make a nation of them. Right? I will protect them and I will do something. Right? And I think what's really nice about this is we see God's continued faithfulness through our mistakes. Back when we talked about Ishmael and the whole situation, we realized that everybody makes mistakes that follow them through life, right? They're hard. Each one of us in our own way, we have an Ishmael who's there, that we took God's plan, and we try to execute it in our way, in our time, and we end up with an Ishmael. And a lot of times we think that God is not faithful because I made this mistake. But God continues to be faithful despite our mistakes. And looking at Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac, we see how faithful God is despite our mistakes. And despite how hard it is for us to deal with our mistakes, the Lord continues to be faithful. He doesn't back down on his faithfulness towards us, even though the mistakes are sometimes big. And so he's telling Abraham, it is time to let go. It is time to send them away. But don't worry, remember what I told you all the way back in chapter 12 when I started this covenant? I am going to bless people through you. So I'm going to bless Ishmael, and he is going to go on to bless others, and I will take care of him. But my promise was not through Ishmael, my promise was through Isaac. So we see God able to come through when it gets messy. And I think the challenge in those situations when our life seems messy is we have a hard time looking and saying, okay, God, how are you going to sort this out? Right? How are you going to organize this? It cannot be done. And he says, no, it can't be done. It's going to be hard, right? You're going to have to cut some ties. This wasn't nice for Abraham. He didn't enjoy this. But this was part of the resolution. And so God is able to resolve a lot of the mistakes that we make. But the resolutions are tough. And they can like really jar at us. But God, like he did with Abraham, is going to say, okay, just keep going. You'll get through it. I will take care of them and I will take care of you. Right? This is part of my faithfulness too. So I think I really like what's happening, even though it's hard, but it's such a beautiful picture of God's continued faithfulness. Any thoughts, questions?
Why doesn't God intercede before the issue with Hagar and everything? Like what, like you pointed out how he's clearly speaking to him now to listen to Sarah, but
Yeah.
what didn't happen before to not listen?
There's a good question. All right. So the question, make sure everybody hears it. All right. And somebody else is going to answer it. Right. But okay, God is interceding now and saying it's time to send Hagar and Ishmael. Why didn't God interfere before when Sarah pitched the idea to Abraham to sleep with Hagar in order to conceive a son? Why? Huh?
Free will.
Okay, free will. What else? Huh? Free will. Right?
I think it's
Freedom of choice. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same question as like, wasn't God in the garden when Adam and Eve were having this conversation? Why did he say like, no, bad idea, yeah, it's gonna end.
One tree over, we're fine. Okay. Still good fruit.
It's like the same question you might get with a lot of non-believers that might have, they're laughing, she was so overjoyed and she was joyful because she went through the pain, but then we might get the question, why did she have to go through the pain? Why couldn't she just be joyful?
Yeah.
Abraham still have a free will in this.
He still has a what?
He has a free will in both of them.
Okay.
So God is not interfering.
He
Yeah.
can still say, even if God is saying listen to Sarah, he can still choose not to take God's advice in that moment.
But like right before the situation with Hagar and Ishmael, God reaffirmed the promise. It was literally the chapter before. He said, it's not going to be Eliezer, it's going to be somebody from your seed.
Yeah,
Right? So he just reaffirmed it, and then Sarah comes up with the idea.
yeah, that's
Right? So we're saying free will, but why is that so important? Why is that element of free will and the choice that Abraham had so important in this relationship? We like the idea of free will, but why?
Maybe like.
You have to like mess up in order to go to him.
Okay, so we can mess up in order to go back to him.
Like test our faith.
Okay, test our faith.
Like preparing him to be a leader.
Okay, preparing him to be a leader. What else? What would the relationship be if every time Abraham had an idea and it was a wrong idea, God's like, nope, don't do that. Nope, don't do that. Controlling, right? You want the promise? This is what you're going to do. Right? What happens to a relationship when it is one of control?
Start to reject it.
You can start to reject it. Let me rephrase the question. What can it not be if it is a relationship of control? Relationship of love. It cannot be a relationship of love if it is a relationship of control. Okay? So the Lord looks at our ideas and he's like, that's a bad idea. Right? In a lot of things. But he gave us this freedom of choice and he invites us into a loving relationship. He says, you choose. You choose. You want to come? I'm right here. I'm not going to change, but it's up to you. Right? You choose what you want to do. And that's what makes kind of the heartache that we go through valuable when we decide to choose to turn and come back. Because we value what it is to come back. I remember those like emotions that seem contradictory, but they complement, right, and create something beautiful together, right? And so we have to have this ability to choose. We have to have this ability to make mistakes and to see how God responds to it, and then to choose to not make the mistake again. That's what makes the relationship beautiful. And we need to apply it in a lot of things. One of the areas that we have to apply this is in the current season that we're in, fasting. Fasting is a free choice that we make. And it's a choice we make out of wanting to be in a loving relationship with God. It's a sacrifice that we make, but it has to be a free choice. What gets me is frequently people come in confession and say, I haven't been fasting. I was like, okay, but we're in confession. What are you talking about? That's not a sin. It's not a sin to say, I'm not fasting. That's a choice that you make. It will predispose you to a sin, but in and itself, it's not a sin. Because we fast, because we choose to be in a loving relationship. Choose to pray because I want to be in communication with God. If the relationship was, if you don't fast, it's a sin and you have to fast if you're going to be with me, then what does fasting become? An absolute, like you have to do it. It's not a choice that we make. What? It becomes legalism, right? If I don't read my Bible, is it a sin? No. I choose to read my Bible because I choose to be in a relationship with God. If I don't read my Bible, am I going to be weak and my defense is down? And can I sin? Yes. And I might go that route and then in a response say, whoa, I saw what drifting from him of my own volition where it will take me and what it will do. Now I'm going to choose to do this. Not because I'm forced, but because this is where I want to be. We all have to make these choices to be in relationship with him, in a loving relationship. And every truly loving relationship is a relationship of sacrifice. There's no good relationships that aren't sacrificial. When the Bible says he's the author of love, well, he authored it through sacrifice. So that's why it's important. Go back to your question. Why didn't he step in? It's because we have to be able to make a choice. Doesn't mean he doesn't step in some situations.
Yeah.
But he can't do it in every situation. Or else no longer is it a relationship of love and choice. Yes.
So what we want to be controlled sometimes, like what we want to be decision.
in some things. Like, if I ask God, I don't know what to do. Can you decide for
Mhm.
me? Make me accept that decision.
Mm.
Will he be able to?
Can he do it? Yes. Will he do it? That's a different question. Okay. Can he show us what to choose? Yes. And we can still choose the opposite. Okay. We can still choose the opposite. But will he do it? I think every situation is so unique and nuanced and why he chooses to or not to speak up or be silent has a lot to do with our personal formation. Right? Sometimes like my kids come and are like, Dad, like I want like they're asking a question. And we might say like we might answer it sometimes, and other times we might say like, I don't know, you decide. Right? Sometimes it depends on how we see them, how they're growing. You know, is this something we've gone through a couple times where, okay, now you should like make the decision yourself? As a parent, we see their development and we respond. God sees our development and he responds likewise to say, okay, how's my kid going to continue to grow? Right? Sometimes it's through an answer, sometimes it's why? Ask him. Okay? Ask him. All right. Let's read 14 through 21. And this is what we're going to end up.
14 through 1.
21.
So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water. And putting it on her shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water and the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot. For she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God said to Hagar out of heaven, said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad to drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an article. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him in the land of Egypt.
All right. So what's happening in this scene?
Hagar is like pleading, saying, let me not see the death of this boy.
Mhm.
And after that, God hears her cry and then says, I'll make him a great nation.
Mhm.
She's like almost comforting her in a way
Mhm.
and hears her and the sadness almost of the voice.
Okay.
I like verse 20 where he said, where it says, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer.
Yeah.
I don't know if this has any correlation, but in verse 16, uh, the use of the word bow shot, right?
Mhm.
Sat across from him at a distance of about a bow shot. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but poetic.
Is is God starting to show favor to the son now as well?
Yeah, so this is the blessing that is being poured on Ishmael. Like bow shot is a way of just describing a distance. So like bow shot like 20, 30 yards is a bow shot.
Shot and archer, there has to be a
Yeah, bow shot is 20, about 20, 30 yards. Okay. Is a decent bow shot. Okay. But how does two questions. Is this the first time an angel approaches Hagar?
No.
No. How do the two times that the angel approaches Hagar differ? And if you're thinking back, you can go back to chapter. There you go, Ishmael, chapter 16.
I think the first time the angels like directing her to go back to Sarah because of her position.
Okay, and how does he, what does he say? 16 verse 8,
Hagar, Sarai's maid,
made,
Uh-huh.
okay? And then here. How does the angel say? What ails you, Hagar?
Oh, just
Right? So what, like, when we compare the two, the first time, Hagar, it wasn't her ordained time to leave. Right? God was still saying, no, you need to go back. You need to build a son. For what reasons, I don't know, but the fruition of it comes down to this point, likely because he wanted Abraham to learn from this mistake. And so he says, no, go back. Hagar, Sarah's maid. And this time he says, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, the God has heard the voice of the lad. So clearly, God sees that it is time for them. So he's now no longer associating her as Sarah's maid. And when we see Sarah had, or Hagar had a difficult life, like Sarah, there was enmity between Hagar and Sarah. And there's a lot of tension. You can imagine like Sarah feeling like you gave my husband a son and I couldn't do that. I would never want to live in a situation like that. Okay. I don't live in a situation like that, and I would never want to live in a situation like that. Okay. It just seems like it'd be miserable. But the pains were heard, the frustration was understood, and now was her time to be liberated. And when we look at Hagar, she was likely made stronger because of this, to the point where this time they were able to make it. God sees how much we can bend, but it knows exactly where our breaking point is. Hagar, the first time through, thought that she had met her breaking point. And God said, nope, you bent quite a bit, but it's not your breaking point. Go back. And now he said, okay, it's time for you to leave. And it's important for us to realize that God will stretch us. God will allow us to be strained and pulled in different directions, sometimes feel, a great deal of despair. But when we continue to hang in there, as long as he's telling us to hang in there, he will form in us characteristics that wouldn't have formed otherwise. And I'm sure that Hagar now had grown, Ishmael had grown, and now it was time for them to be blessed, and kind of create their own way. And frequently, when we look at this situation that Hagar was in and Ishmael, they both thought that this was the end. I mean, she didn't want to see her son die. So this distance that she had put herself in was understandably, what a mother would do, saying, I don't want to see my kid die. This was, such a tough point, but the Lord allows these points to happen because when he steps in, he doesn't want us to be confused as to how we got out of it. So it's not infrequent that he will put us in situations or allow us to be in situations that we look at like no solution. What was the solution? You die over there, I die over here. God says, no, you're not going to die. Okay. But I want you to know who brought you out of this. So he does this several times in the history of Israel. Like one situation that really stands out was, oh my gosh, the judge, Gideon, where he's going against 50,000 Midianites, and he whittles the army down to 300. And until he gets down to 300, he's like, nope, still too many, because if you do it with this much, you will think that you did it on your own. Let's go down a little bit more. Nope, let's go down a little bit more. 300. Now there's no way for you to think that it was you. Right? So he does this. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes it actually just stinks, like when he does that. But it's also important so that we're not confused. That was it my own ability that got out, or was it God's ability? God likes to make things clear in these situations. So when we're being whittled down, just be patient, because he will rescue, right? If it's his plan. All right. So that's it for today. We have one more meeting next week, right? And we are going to be done with Abraham, and we're going to do Abraham or Genesis chapter 22, which is the sacrifice of Isaac. So it's been a beautiful study. Any last questions before we wrap up? Okay, let's close in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Thank you, Lord, for all your blessings. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to come and to see how you fashion things together, how you allow us to make our mistakes, to deal with our frustrations, and you give us a choice in the matter, Lord. But despite our poor choices, you remain faithful. Help us to not see our poor choices as an end of your faithfulness, Lord, but to see your faithfulness through our poor choices. For truly you are faithful to Abraham and all those around him, despite the choices that were made, Lord. So thank you for continuing to fashion your servant Abraham to be a leader, and allowing us to see the journey that it took him to where we will see him next week, as the one who's so faithful to you that he is even willing to sacrifice his only son. And Lord, may you bring an Abraham-like faith out of each one of us in our own way and in our own time. Through the intercessions of all your saints who will please you from the beginning, hear us as we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Through Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever.